Look who's back at it again. So, I was watching a critique on one of my favorite shows growing up, and I know it was all done in good fun, and that's the nature of the video and the whole series. But man, screw these critics. I don't bring this up to jump into the absolute battleground that Twitter X has become, because they already have that covered over there. There's plenty of people and no end to the arguments over there with the stories and movies going on. But I bring this up as someone who wants to get into storytelling, which, thanks to all these critics out there, I feel like the bar has never been higher. We live in a day and age where your whole career could be ended by some rando online who nitpicks your content. And I mean nitpick. Now, to be clear, my gripe today is not with modern messaging or politics inside of storytelling. That's a whole nother subject entirely on criticisms on that kind of stuff. No, I'm talking about unforgiving critics who are breaking down every detail and ruining everyone's fun. It's becoming really obnoxious. It feels like no one can tell their story unless they have every single detail planned out. And you better not make a mistake, because they will find you and they will make you answer for it. Do you see where I'm getting at with my point? Feels like the stories that are worth telling and can be, counted as original, that use a little bit of imagination, never get told because of a huge problem with perfectionist gatekeeping. How many times have you had a great idea, but you feel like it was going to get shut down because you thought someone was going to completely dissect it if you told it? Let's imagine if your story took place in the past, and your main character is using a steel sword, but then some no-lifer shows up and absolutely loses it over how your character should be using an iron sword since they didn't have steel yet. Who cares? It's not the point. It's such a minor detail, it does not matter. And this is what I find wrong with the internet in its constant mission to fact-check every detail and answer the questions no one asked. I really wish I could have made a story back in the 80s and 90s before the internet. If you watch those movies, do you realize how much they got away with? They got to invent the tropes, and then they took advantage of making it up as they went along. And if someone came along and called them out on it, they're protected under the title of being a classic. But wait. You're telling me that you could have overlooked those minor details and mistakes this whole time? Just because something was considered a classic? Unbelievable. Talk about a complete double standard. If these stories were told today, they'd be dragged through the mud and never see the light of day again. Don't believe me? Fine, I'll show you how easy it is to nitpick a movie using today's standards. Let's pick on Star Wars Episode 4. Most spacecraft aren't traveling at the speed of light, and they seem to be able to get to any planet they want in less than a day, without a bathroom, which was introduced in Mandalorian Season 1. How could their galaxy that's so far away have so many planets that people can live on, when ours only seems to have one planet we can live on? Lasers travel at the speed of light, and would shoot their target well before they could react to it. How can everyone be a pilot and have time to know every alien language out there? How did they build a moon-sized colony in 18 years, and why would it have such a specific weakness that would just blow it up? And the debris from that explosion would be dangerous for the planet it was going to destroy anyway. And how did everybody forget about Jedis in only 18 years? And is the Force sentient or just a convenient plot device? What does it mean to even use the Force? Are droids alive, or is their AI just that advanced? Why do stormtroopers miss all their shots? Aren't they supposed to be military-trained killers? How did a tentacle monster survive living in a trash compactor? Okay, alright. I need to stop there. I was getting a little carried away there. But do you see what I mean? These oversights, they're not important, and they only get in the way of telling a good story. And yet, Star Wars is given a free pass because it's considered a classic and didn't have to stand up to the scrutiny and mercilessness of the internet. I'm starting to think that critics don't know what they're talking about. This double standard may keep them employed and make them look smart, but it makes for a bad story. I don't even want to imagine what Star Wars would be like if it had to stop and explain every single detail in the whole universe that it's building. That movie would be borderline unwatchable if it had to explain space travel and how alien languages. There's an art to storytelling and screenplay. There's a fine line you have to walk between world building, exposition, and entertainment. And you aren't going to retain an audience if you spend too much time on world building. Don't get me wrong, world building is a great tool and sets the stage for the audience, but it can be overdone. I remember when I read the Lord of the Rings books, and I was bored to tears when I was reading all the needless backstory that was given to insignificant characters or objects. But thanks to all the exposition and explanation, you can immerse yourself in the world and appreciate it. Oh yeah? Is that why I appreciate they cut that crap from the movies and got straight to the good parts? And that's why I appreciate screenwriting for what it is. They have to use the same source material and condense it into the important parts, while still giving the audience enough information to understand the world they were dropped into. Which also brings up the other elephant in the room. Sometimes there could be too much source material. Too many times do we hear that movies, specifically superhero movies, are comic book accurate, which isn't a bad thing unless you use this as an excuse to skip over details and shortcut stories to the good parts. It's just lazy when you give your audience homework assignments just so you don't want to explain the story. You do have the longtime fans that have followed these characters for years, and if your story's catered to them, get ready to get nitpicked to hell. And if you go the other route, get ready to be abandoned by the casual viewer. There's really no winning with critics. So my advice, don't play their games. The story should always come first, and the ones that last are the ones that continue telling the story out of passion and didn't trip over critiques along the way. I guess you could say there are two sides to storytelling that are told. The actual story, and the ones the critic makes up. At that point it becomes a contest of will. Will the critic succeed and silence your story? Or will you continue until it's finished? Too many times have we seen the critics win that I'm starting to think it's a little one-sided. But as you saw with what I did with Star Wars earlier, it was incredibly easy to pick that apart and hold it to standards it was never meant to explain. And for what? Setting the fantasy world to play by our rules and remind us that something like that couldn't exist? So why waste our time thinking about it? That's not how imagination works. You know that thing that makes us human? To imagine things that can be and occasionally break the rules to see what life could be like if you were in someone else's shoes, somewhere else? So, what am I saying? Is there no such thing as bad stories or constructive criticism? No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is we live in a world dominated by too many critics to the point where I don't know any new stories anymore. It's out of balance, and for every original story coming out, there are a dozen reaction or breakdown videos released to dissect it. Being a critic is pretty easy, and I think the guy from Ratatouille said it perfectly. You don't put anything on the line, and everyone loves to read about negativity, and it's also fun to write. But that's the funny thing about negative reviews. Everyone remembers how they felt when they read it, not what was said. So a lot of times people's stories aren't being judged fairly. They are up against the hate mob and that just wants to haze them for a little bit and move on. But here's the thing, you can treat criticism like that, a momentary setback that will pass when they find something new to hate on. And there's one other thing, you can learn and get better. If they had a point and provided constructive feedback, then you can improve for next time. You don't have to give up due to a setback. In life, we can make mistakes. Storytelling, much like any other profession, is something you can get better at and make mistakes in. I know in our day and age, it feels like things are less forgiving since the world is constantly at our fingertips. But I think we can adapt and overcome this obstacle as well. And I think this can be done just by going back to basics. You have a story to tell, just worry about the elements that stay with the theme and progress the plot. As long as you're passionate about your story and put it first, who knows, maybe like Star Wars and Dragon Ball, your fans will let you iron out the details later down the road. Anyway, that was my take on the state of things as they are. It's quite the mess. Endless sequels, soulless multiverses, and never-ending critics keeping us from straying too far from what we got or even getting involved in it. Which does bring up the question, is there a fine line between being a critic and a storyteller? I believe so. Critiquing someone else's work is a good way to learn and improve from it. Just like with many things though, it's easy to get carried away. Some stories are just bad and some critics are just trying to get easy clickbait with rage baiting. So I guess I'll leave you with this. There will always be opposition whatever you do. I won't go as far as saying you should tune out all negative feedback, but I will tell you that not all of it is legitimate, and it shouldn't be the reason you give up on your ideas. Take everything with a grain of salt. Heck, even take what I said with a grain of salt. After all, wasn't this a critique on the state of things? And doesn't that make me the same as them? I hope I gave you something to think about. Till next time.